Welcome to the Climate Report. This is Hart Hagen and I'm your host, and we are on episode 10. The topic of this show is how to make a profit by waging war on democracy, or how to make money by waging war on democracy. First, let me say that we are listener-supported radio. WFMP FM Louisville is listener-supported radio. And what that means is that we are not under the influence of corporate ownership or corporate sponsors. The benefit to you is that we can shoot straight with you, and we can, if we are so inclined, be quite critical of corporate America. And that's important because corporate America, multinational corporations, are in control of our media and our government. Very important that we understand that. In order for us to understand that, we need to talk about it. So, since we are listener-supported radio, I'm going to ask you to consider supporting WFMP-FM Forward Radio by going to forwardradio.org. Consider a gift of a one-time gift of $20, or consider a monthly gift of $5 to $10. It would be a great help. That way you can help us keep listener-supported radio on the air. So the title of this show is The Climate Report. The purpose of this show is for us to talk about how we can solve the problem of climate change, and that necessarily involves us talking about politics. Climate change has a scientific component, but it's not the science that's getting us down. It is the politics of the matter. And in order to change our politics, we have to change our minds. And to change our minds, we have to learn, but more to the point, we have to rethink everything. Rethinking everything means we rethink the nature of our democracy, because our democracy is not what we were taught that it was. Our democracy currently is not really controlled by the people. It is controlled by big business. Big business is the power behind the throne. So we're going to have to rethink the nature of our democracy. We're also going to have to rethink how power works. And the main thing we need to know about that is that power works in favor of the people when we organize locally. We need to rethink other things like why we go to war, because the reasons we're told we go to war are so different from the reasons we actually go to war. Think of the war in Iraq. Oh, we're going because weapons of mass destruction, or we're going because they support terrorists. And we're going because we're going to restore democracy in Iraq. On and on and on. Lies, lies, lies about how or why we go to war. So we're going to rethink that on this show. Another thing we're going to rethink is what the federal budget is spent on. Here's why. Because to have a healthy society, we really need social programs. We need health care, we need education, but we need infrastructure. But when it comes to spending money on these things, guess what? The federal government is always broke, or we have to balance the budget. We have to deal with the deficit. But then a war comes along and we're going to borrow trillions of dollars, trillions and trillions of dollars to pay for this war. So that's why we need to rethink what the federal budget is spent on. because there is plenty of money in the federal budget if we just spend it on what really matters to people instead of spending the federal budget on what matters to a few oligarchs. We also need to rethink how we spend our time, because in order to solve the problem of climate change, and in order to solve the social problems that we have, it's going to require that people get involved. The story of American history is not a story of wealthy, privileged people giving us rights out of the goodness of their hearts. Wealthy, privileged people who run this country will hold on to power and privilege as long as they can, because as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. Power concedes nothing without a demand. So we need to rethink how we spend our time. We need to organize locally, and guess what? It needs to be fun, because if it's not fun, we won't do it consistently. Find some people, some local political activist organizations that you enjoy being with, and spend time with them because it's fun for you. What's fun for me and what's fun for you are going to be two different things. What's engaging to me and what's engaging to you are going to be two different things. But find out what you enjoy doing politically and socially and get involved. So we need to rethink how we spend our time. So today's topic is how to wage war on democracy and win. Obviously, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek treatment. We don't want anybody to be waging war on democracy, but in fact, that is exactly what goes on in the power structures. And we will talk about how that happens. I'm going to be speaking in the voice of Frank, who is an old CEO who is talking to Ernest, who is a young CEO, and Frank and Ernest are going to be talking about how to make money by waging war on democracy and how to wage war on democracy and win. But first, how specifically does this relate to climate? Well, here's the thing. Most people want action on climate change, but we're not getting it. So we have a system that does not favor what the majority of people want. It can be called the democratic deficit. Democratic deficit is the difference between public opinion and public policy. So public opinion and public policy are different when it comes to climate change. Public opinion wants action on climate change, but that is not what our public policy is currently providing for. In like manner, the majority of people want national health care, but that's not what we're getting, so we need to fix our democracy to make it work that way. The majority of people want reductions in the defense budget, especially in peacetime, and so we need to fix our democracy so that it works for the majority. The majority of people want reasonable regulations when it comes to environment, when it comes to labor, when it comes to food safety, when it comes to health. The majority of people want these things. So it's important for us to fix our democracy by first understanding how it currently works and what is wrong. So if I'm Frank talking to Ernest, lesson 1 on how to make money by waging war on democracy is pay off politicians, because here's how that works. The American people think they live in a democracy, but we go to the voting booth, and whoever we vote for, that person is owned by the big banks. And whoever we vote for, that person is owned by the war machine, the war profiteers. Whoever we vote for, whether we vote Democrat or Republican, that person is owned by big oil. So that's what Americans think that they vote for this person or that person. They're really just voting for personalities. They're not voting on issues. So, and that's good for us. If I'm Frank, the old CEO, talking to Ernest, the young CEO, that's good for us because you just got to learn how to take some of your money, some of your profits, and pay off those politicians. And that is how the game is played, my man. So in that instance, the way that you're waging war on democracy is by making people think they live in a democracy when in fact they live in, call it what you want. It's an oligarchy, it's a plutocracy, but it is, oligarchy is the rule of a few, in this case a few business people, a few corporations. Plutocracy is the rule of money, so we have the rule of money. So no matter who people vote for, they go to Washington, D.C., and they vote the interest of big business because big business is paying for it all, and that's how the game is played. Lesson number 2 is how to wage war on democracy overseas. Now I'm going to name a list of about, 10 countries here where the United States has waged war on democracy overseas. But first, why do we want to wage war? And if I'm a business person, if I'm Frank talking to Ernest, we're both CEOs, why do we want to wage war on democracy overseas? Well, the thing is, it's a lot more profitable to go overseas and buy land and grow crops or extract mineral resources, or let's talk about going to India or Iran or Iraq or South America, and we've got Disney and we've got all these companies that want to advertise and sell movies and sell TV shows and sell American products, sell American clothes, sell American brands. So the thing is, we can sell a lot more American goods and extract a lot more resources if we don't have the pesky population to deal with. So here's the thing. Some people think that the resources of a country ought to go for the benefit of the people of that country. That's not the way it usually works, though. But if we had to deal with a democracy in Nicaragua or Guatemala or Chile or Iran, not Iran, but or Mexico. Well, I mean, some of these places have a nominal democracy. Haiti. Haiti has a nominal democracy, but it's usually somebody that is not really the popularly elected person. Because we manipulate elections in all these countries. That is absolutely ludicrous for us to be all huffy and puffy and indignant that the Russians might have manipulated our elections. We have manipulated so many elections overseas, big countries, little countries, that we have no place to talk about other people messing with our elections. So the reason that we, the business oligarchs, the reason we don't want democracy in other countries is because it's easier to deal with a puppet dictator. It's easier to deal with a fascist regime than it is to deal with the people who are concerned about their own needs and not about the needs of American business. So that's why we wage war on democracies overseas. Here's how some of that has happened in history. In Iran, in 1953, we deposed a popularly elected prime minister and parliament. The prime minister was by the name of Mossadegh, and we installed the Shah of Iran, who was a brutal dictator who ruled Iran with an iron fist for 25 years, and we wonder why Iranians are suspicious of Americans. But we deposed a popularly elected government and installed a dictator. In Guatemala, the very next year, in 1954, we opposed a popularly elected government and we installed a brutal dictator by the name of Somoza. In Chile in 1973, we deposed a popularly elected parliament and president by the name of Salvador Allende, and we installed a brutal dictator by the name of Augusto Pinochet in 1973. In Nicaragua, we waged war in Nicaragua from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, waged war in Nicaragua. We supported the Contras against the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas, in my humble opinion, were the good guys. They were the people's government, but we felt like we had to wage war on communism where we wage war on communism everywhere we go. Communism was the boogeyman. But the thing is, in history, when we're waging war on communism, we're usually waging war on democracy, because that's just kind of the way it works. It's funny how that works, because we've been taught that communism is authoritarian. Communism is USSR. Usually the communists in these countries didn't have anything to do with the USSR. In Vietnam, the communists had nothing to do with the Soviet Union. In Nicaragua, the communists had little or nothing to do with the Soviet Union. But even if they did, in Cuba, yes. In Cuba, the communists had something to do with the Soviet Union, but if you knew how vicious and aggressive the United States has been toward Cuba, you would understand why they felt they needed self-defense and they were willing to go to the Soviet Union for some self-defense against the United States. This has been entirely, deleted from our textbooks, and yes, I get a little bit worked up about it. But the main point is that we have waged war on democracy, or in the case of Iraq, okay, so we go into Iraq and technically we're supposedly waging war on Saddam Hussein, but what the American people don't understand is that Saddam Hussein, for most of the relevant time in the couple of decades of his rule, most of that time he was a client of the United States. So when I say we're waging war against democracy, not waging war on democracy in Iraq, but let me ask you this. If the Iraqi people had a choice, would they have us come in and destroy their country? What if they had a choice? So what I'm saying is that when the United States goes into all these little defenseless countries and makes war, it has nothing to do with freedom and democracy. It has everything to do with American business interests. I will challenge anyone to a public debate on that particular topic. Not like I'm being all confrontational with you, my listener. I'm just saying that the facts speak for themselves once you know the facts. But in American, we're so brainwashed in the United States. I love my country, but I don't like the media or the government. I like what government can do for people. I don't like what the government often does do for people and to people when it comes to the military. But the point is, if I'm a CEO and I want to make money, then I'm going to help other CEOs make money by, I might not be the CEO of Boeing. I might not be the CEO of Halliburton or Bechtel or these arms manufacturers, Honeywell. I might not be those CEOs, but I want to collaborate with those other CEOs. I help them, they help me. We cooperate on similar I help them with their legislative agenda. They help me with my legislative agenda, and everybody's happy. At least everybody that's rich and in charge and has a lot of money and controls a lot of corporate interests. So I'm still Frank, the old CEO, talking to Ernest, the young CEO. And lesson 3 is how to make war. You have to define an enemy. People, whether it's a democracy or whether it's a dictatorship, people are not going to go to war voluntarily unless they think they're being attacked or they're fighting for some noble cause. They're defending their countrymen against the threat of aggression. So, for 50 years, during the Cold War, the boogeyman was the Soviet Union, the evil Russians. John F. Kennedy said it was a monolithic and ruthless empire. If you look at history, you will understand that we were 10 times, 20 times, 50 times more aggressive toward the Soviets than they were toward us. Let's review some facts. Who are the Soviet leaders? Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Andropov, and Gorbachev. So we know that 3 of those 6 Soviet leaders offered nuclear disarmament, and we couldn't be bothered. Stalin offered nuclear disarmament to Truman. We couldn't be bothered. Khrushchev offered nuclear disarmament to Kennedy. We couldn't be bothered. Gorbachev offered nuclear disarmament to Reagan or Bush and Clinton. We couldn't be bothered. So the thing is, we were much more aggressive toward them. Why? Because if I'm a CEO, if I'm a war profiteer, if I'm an oil company, we're talking about climate change. If I'm an oil company, you can't make money. There's no money in peace. There's only money in war. You want war. The Pentagon is the world's single biggest user of fossil fuels. You can't make money without war. You need war to make big money. But if you're going to get the people to go along with all that, you need to convince them that they're being attacked. So the Soviet Union was the big boogeyman. They were the bad guys. Movies, books, government rhetoric. John F. Kennedy saying the Soviet Union is the monolithic and ruthless empire, or monolithic and ruthless conspiracy. 3 key words there: monolithic, ruthless, conspiracy. You got to convince people that they're going to be attacked. You got to convince the people that there is a bad guy out there who wants to get you. Here's how we know that the Soviet threat was not a threat at all. Here's how we know that the Soviet Union as an arch enemy was a big, fat lie. Let's go to 1989. The Berlin Wall comes down. All of a sudden, the Soviet Union is coming apart, and it's like, wow, we don't have to spend all this money on war anymore. In 1989, people were talking about the peace dividend. People were talking about, hey, there's going to be some money that we don't have to spend on war anymore. And guess what? Did the Pentagon budget go down? I don't think so. But what we did do was we came up with another boogeyman, and it is narco traffickers. So not long at all after the Berlin Wall comes down, we invade Panama and we go in and capture Manuel Noriega because he's this evil narco trafficker. In point of fact, he was a minor narco trafficker, but he wasn't obeying American orders. So for a long while, the boogeyman was the evil Russians, the Soviet Union, and then the boogeyman became the narco traffickers. And I don't even want to talk. Don't get me started on what we're doing to the country of Colombia because of the war on drugs. So there's the Soviets, there's the war on drugs, and then there's the war on terror. So can we talk about the war on terror? Okay, 9/11, it was a tragic event. It was life-changing. Anybody who was around, you know where you were when that event happened. It was traumatic. I get that. And at the time, I was among the people that wanted to, I don't know, extract a pound of flesh or whatever. But so it's a terrible event. The question is, how are we going to react? And here's what we've done. Never mind the fact that we've probably killed over 1 million people between Iraq and Afghanistan. Never mind the other people. Let's talk about the United States servicemen and women. 3,000 people, 3,000 Americans died in 9/11. And then, what do? I don't know the numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's like 4,000, 5,000 or more American servicemen and women have died because of the war on terror. How much sense does that make? It's like, I'm in a boxing match. I'm going to win this boxing match by beating up the other guy's gloves with my face. That's how much sense it makes for us to for us to put American men and women in harm's way to fight a war on terror, and we've succeeded in doing nothing but increase the amount of terrorism, because terrorism, as unjustifiable as it is, as unthinkable as it is to you and me, it is a response to American brutality and American occupation and Americans traveling the world, especially the Middle East, acting like we own the place. We don't own the place, and Arabs and Muslims resent our being there. Having said that, 95% of them have a positive opinion about the United States, but we're pushing our luck, and terrorism is on the rise because of our actions. Okay, so I'm still Frank talking to Ernest. I'm the old CEO talking to the young CEO. The last lesson for today is to employ Orwellian doublespeak. In 1984, in the dystopian world that George Orwell created, Big Brother said, war is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. We have so many words in our vocabulary that mean the opposite, where the dictionary meaning and the actual meaning are opposites. Like national security. So we go to war because of national security, but it actually makes us more insecure. We sell planes and weapons to other countries, and so as to bolster our security, but it makes us more insecure because then we have to build better planes because we never know when our former allies are going to turn on us. So national security is actually national insecurity. The national interest is not the national interest, it's the interest of rich people. And I could go on. We'll talk more about Orwellian doublespeak on another episode. This is Hart Hagen with the Climate Report on WFMP FM Louisville, listener-supported radio. Go to forwardradio.org and support this station. Thanks a lot for your time. Have a nice day.